Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the RU-251, which is Germany's recently added rank 4 battle rating 6.7 premium light tank. Now this tank review will feature obviously a major comparison of this tank with its major opponents on the battlefield. I will give you also a full rundown on the statistics, will give you tips and tricks how to take this tank out on the battlefield, how to counter it, but also how to make it work effectively. Now, before I start, I have to give you a bit of a warning here. This tank is a bit controversial and I will look at the good sides and the bad sides. Not just for the tank itself, but also in the greater picture. So that means I give you a bit of an introduction rambling. With the up-tiering of the Panther II, there was simply a gap in performance for the Germans at 6.7. And 6.7 is for me and for many people an important battle rating because it's the last stop before you go into the high tier matchmaking, and that is not always a pleasure to fight. Especially when we look at certain upgrade ways for certain tanks. And this is also another point of criticism, that this tank makes absolutely no sense with its battle rating, and also when you look at the argumentation why the Panther II was up-tiered. The Panther II had basically a heavy tank gun of the same nation on a much more mobile medium tank platform with decent armor, decent survivability, and a great punch because of the gun. And that made this tank apparently one of the most played tanks at its battle rating. To also have a good win ratio, that also meant at the end that it was up to 7.0. Apparently it didn't really hurt the Panther II, but the 6.7 tanks, and in particular the King Tigers, because suddenly they had nothing left to rely on securing their flanks. To implement the RU-251 as a light tank at the battle rating of the former Panther II with more mobility and also in certain respects punchier gun as a very expensive premium tank sounds a bit strange to me, to put it in very polite words. There is not too much wrong with the tank's performance. In fact, it is the fastest tank in the game, at least that it is how it is advertised, and from playing it I kind of agree. This is a really fast tank with an excellent maneuverability, although not without its strange faults, but they are not really neck-breaking for this tank, I have to add. Then there is the gun, and that is just simply a slap in the face for so many people in the game, in my opinion. Remember, this is a 6.7 light tank with a gun that is very similar to gun systems that you find on other nations, medium tanks with a higher battle rating. And that is strange, because it has access to a 320mm heat shell, which is the shell that you will mostly fire the most. And that is a pretty big insult in my opinion, especially for certain American drivers. Yes, M47 and M48, I'm looking at you. In particular, the M47 has one of the worst stock grinds in the game, where you very often feel helpless against the opponents that you face, up until the point that you have the heat shell, which then gives you a fighting chance at battle rating 7.3. So that's a lot higher than this tank in terms of battle rating and kind of the meta. And also the question is, can this tank effectively support the King Tiger in this respect to, make 6.7 a bit more enjoyable again, to give the Germans a fighting chance? The simple answer is no. The bit more in-depth answer is it might be, but the performance difference between the King Tiger and the RU-251 is just simply too big. Also, again, this is an expensive premium, so to rely on this tank to be part of a 6.7 lineup is kind of fishy. You should have always a full lineup of non-premium tanks and non-premium planes to make for a competitive lineup. And also, I don't know if you noticed it, but the simple kind of way how realistic battles work is, you need to go for the objective, then you capture it, and then you try to hold it. The problem is all other nations can just walk over you. If you don't make the killing blow with the first shot, you have a big problem. Yes, you can reverse, but very often you are driving through areas which don't deliver the cover that you need, or they just track you or kill your driver, and then the second shell kills you. And that happens before the King Tiger is there to support you. And even then, the King Tiger these days doesn't have the mighty punch at its battle rating in comparison to all the other tanks that it once had. So the King Tiger by itself, as featured in many videos on YouTube and also on my channel, kind of doesn't have its glory from the old days. Also, the killing power of the RE251 doesn't seem to be right for this battle rating. Very often you can penetrate and deal heavy damage to an enemy opponent, but then you kind of lack the killing blow, den Fangschuss in German. And that is crucial for a light tank. And that is why, for example, the Super Hellcat, in my opinion, at its battle rating, or even 6.7, is in this respect a better light tank / tank destroyer than the RE251. And it is one of your biggest rivals in this respect, and you certainly have to watch out. Surprisingly enough, another premium vehicle. So you kind of see where this is going. There are so many arguments that I could make, and I will show you certain examples in the tank review that just will point this fact out. The tank by itself is good. Is it worth the money? Basically, yes, but not at its battle rating. Surprisingly enough, the solution is not a down tier, but an up tier. This is one of the few tanks that I actually would recommend it. So, without further ado, let's finally get into the tank review. As usual, I will begin with a decent look at the armor, but this is a light tank, so it will not really shine with the armor, does it? 30mm for the lower and the upper hull. Despite some angling, it's not really exceeding 60mm. This driver's hatch bubble here is also rather flat, and there is also a bit of a part of the lower not lower glacis, but the bottom armor visible with just 12.7mm, so you're also quite vulnerable for artillery strikes and bomb hits. Yeah, then the side armor, 20mm, yeah, not really great, and the most part is flat, and the tracks and the additional structural steel of chassis will not really save you. The rear armor, disastrous 8mm, even light machine gun fire can penetrate this and damage your engine and eventually set it on fire. Then, even 50 cals can penetrate the side from flat on. And then also your front, well, 30mm is rather thin, so a lot of armor interaction rules and overmatch mechanics will have their best of performance with this armor. Furthermore, we see the deck armor of the engine and overall the tank together with a big portion of the turret, just 10mm. So very vulnerable to rockets and even cannon fire and even some heavy machine gun fire. So you better don't get hit, right? The turret all around together with the front here is all around 20mm thick, and that is also not very good. Then we also have this front part here, 15mm. It also can get overmatched quite a lot. Then you might think maybe the gun mantle will help me out. Not really. The strongest part is this 30mm. With some angling you will get up to nearly 40mm. Not very impressive. There is a little bit of overlay, but that might just help you from some random AAA shots. And the gun mantle here itself is just 15mm thick. So everything can and will kill you. Especially AAAs or guns with a lot of 50 cals pose a big threat. You can get shot trapped even with 50 cals, and you will lose your gunner very likely. so not very good. Also, if somebody splashes your turret front with a big HE shell, if it doesn't go through that outright, it will splash down into this very big ammo rack with around about 50 shells, which explodes very reliable. Typical German ammo racks. Then we also have the driver and the loader situated on the right hand side, with the gunner and the commander on the left hand side. Please note that the gunner sits relatively low in the tank, and if you hit the turret with a solid AP shot, well, you're most likely to just kill the commander and the gunner gets away alive, at least for the moment, because we also have a 11 round ready ammo rack right here, which you should remove 10 shots of, because one of the shells is registered as being in the breach already. So remove 10 rounds, and that leaves you with 51 rounds of ammunition in total, which is more than enough. We also have the engine together with the transmission and the fuel tanks in the back. They not just love to burn, but also to blow up quite regularly. So the tank doesn't really shine with survivability and armor, so it must have its strength otherwhere. So let's have a look at the other stats. Of course, for a light tank, a lot of the performance lies within its mobility, and this tank has one of the best mobility and maneuverability aspects in the game. It flies across the battlefield. With a 660 horsepower engine for just 25.5 tons, you have a fantastic horsepower to ton ratio of 25.9. That is something between 16 to 36% better horsepower to ton ratio in comparison to comparable tanks. Also, the top speed is a fantastic 80 kilometers an hour, leaving even the Super Hellcat behind by 10%. And the reverse speed also minus 80 kilometers an hour. That is just fantastic. Of course, it's minus 80 kilometers an hour. And also it's backed up by neutral steering, so that is also fantastic. So it seems like this tank doesn't leave any wish open, or does it? Well, in arcade it's actually quite fun to drive this tank around and challenging to keep it under control. In this respect, I want to mention the Halloween The Hellcat race, of which you will find a fun guide on my channel if you look for it. But back to the mobility aspect, the tank feels very fast, and indeed it is very fast. Especially in hard terrain, you accelerate a lot. And again, the maneuverability is good, but don't let deceive you that from the actual performance. You have a lot of drag on the tracks, which doesn't feel right, especially at low speed. It just takes just those additional seconds to get you up to speed, and that is confusing, because at higher speeds you feel really alive, you feel fast and nimble, and you are, but it doesn't really reflect a good horsepower to ton ratio, especially on muddy and mid terrain. The ground resisting stats seem to be very awful, and again it's masked up by the good horsepower to ton ratio. So if you lack the experience of driving the Super Hellcat, the Hellcat, the Walker Bulldog, even the Object 906, you really will not notice it. Although I have to say it's a big improvement over the Panther 2, but that is more of a medium tank with a touch of a heavy tank. So again, don't let yourself be fooled by this. You have to actually drive this tank to feel it. But again, it's really fast, but it is not the advertised real advantage that you have. So in most of the cases, you're happy to see 50-55 kilometers an hour. There seems to be a big problem with the driver to be able to shift between the 5th and 6th gear, and even downhill sometimes you don't get up to speed, especially on Kursk. It's outright, astonishing how you lack the advertised speed for your excellent horsepower to ton ratio and going on a downhill on seemingly good terrain. So there is that. The next aspect, of course, is the firepower of the RE251, which features a 90mm Bordkanone 90 BK90 with 61 rounds. This is all around the same gun as on the Kanonjagd Panzer 45, although I did not really compare the stats to this tank, as the comparison to other tanks is much more interesting. First of all, you have a really great reload of 7.5 seconds. That is 0.2 seconds faster than the Type 61, which for all intents and purposes features the same gun, although it's named the Type 61 gun. Then also it is much faster by 2 seconds in comparison to the Super Hellcat, which also features a very similar M3 cannon. Then you also have 1 second advantage over the Panther II with its long 88. And yeah, the M41 Walker Bulldog, especially the Japanese Self-Defense Force version, has a reload advantage of 1.6 seconds towards you, but that is down to the caliber of the gun. The Leopard 1, which I want to feature here also in a comparison with its L7A3 cannon, has a 0.4 reload advantage for a 105mm gun, so keep that in mind. Also the Object Nano 6, which is a very interesting competitor, also being a light tank, having a similar caliber of 85mm for its D58 cannon, has a reload advantage of 1.5 seconds for a really great gun. So you kind of see the reload is good. It's better than comparable medium tanks or tank destroyers in this respect, but it really can't compete at the higher ends of reload times, but it's still not very disastrous. The turret rotation speed, well, that's an odd one, because it's definitely a medium tank turret rotation speed of 24 degrees, which is the very same to the Type 61 and the Super Hellcat. The Panther II has a 50% slower turret rotation speed, but the Walker Bulldog, as a true light tank, has 36 degrees per second, which is 50% faster. And again, you're on par with the Leopard 1, which is a main battle tank slash medium tank. The Object Nano 6 is technically a light tank or tank destroyer hybrid like the Super Hellcat, and it's also amphibious, but just has 20 degrees per second, so it's kind of an odd fish, literally. Then there is the gun depression. -9 degrees is not the best, but it's certainly not bad, and 20 degrees of gun elevation is really good. What is a bit odd about the RE251 is the overall gun handling, how it feels. It doesn't feel as nimble as the tank is. Also the elevation speed of just 4 degrees. As you can see, it's very similar to the overwhelming majority of tanks, but just in comparison to the Leopard 1 with its 6 degrees per second and the Object Nano 6 4.5 degrees per second, it just feels this touch too slow. Especially in kind of snapshot situations where you have to slow down to carefully aim, because this tank has no stabilizer. Sorry about this. It kind of has difficulties, let's put it that way, and that might be a reason for the 6.7 battle rating, and that just cost me more than just once my dear life. The RE251 is one of those tanks that just relies on chemical energy based shells, and the first shell that I want to show you is the M71 shell, which is a pure high explosive shell, 11 kilograms of warhead, traveling at an initial muzzle velocity of 823 meters per second with a TNT equivalent of 925 grams. That's way above the 700 grams hull break threshold, so you can initiate hull break with this against lightly armored vehicles, but 13 millimeters of overall penetration at any distance at any angle is not really worth talking about, particularly when we look at the second shell type, which is the DM502 hash shell. And yes, this is a 90 millimeter hash shell. Again, 11 kilograms of warhead, traveling at an initial muzzle velocity of 853 meters per second. Not really high, but also not really slow in comparison to other nations' hash shells, especially at higher calibers. The TNT equivalent is 3.05 kilograms. Fuse delay is 0.4 meters. Fuse sensitivity 0.1 millimeters. So that means you can't shoot through any kind of obstacle. The shell will explode on contact with literally everything. And then we come to the really nice part. The penetration is advertised with 102 millimeters at any angle, at any distance. But that is kind of where it gets really, really strange. Because that means that you can't just go through the 100 millimeter plating on things like the T54, 49, 51, T62, and also the premium IS6, at least when you don't hit the center 120 millimeter part. In fact, you can't reliably go through that. It is very RNG based, it's very unreliable, and then also the damage output is good, but it's not a one shot in every case, so keep that in mind. And also the side armor does not really be a good target for the hash shell on the IS6. Now, I did a bit of testing also with the upper plate on a Panther II and also a Tiger H1. The surprising fact was that when we both stood still, I could not penetrate the 100 millimeter platings in 8 out of 10 cases. But when one of the tanks was in movement, and especially when the opponent was braking and I shot, then I penetrated in 8 out of 10 cases, which is very, very strange, because hash shouldn't really give a damn about angling, although, especially on the IS6, as you can see here on the stat card, the angle of attack goes just for 30 degrees. After that, it's unknown territory. Now you might expect, well, that's not really interesting, as long as we don't hit like 15 degrees of angle where you bounce. I thought so myself, but if you look at the angling on the IS6, it's 65 degrees of sloping, so the angle of attack is 25 degrees on even ground. And that means that maybe you lose a few millimeters after that. That is pure speculation, but the speculation was backed up by testing. What I know for sure is that it's highly unreliable against thick armor that is at the edge of the penetration values. If something is 90 millimeters thick, you will go through it, but 100 millimeters is very dubious. If the Russians and also the Panther II and the Tiger H1 in particular have a better armor value coefficient than 1, I don't know, but particularly interesting was the Panther II and also the Tiger 2, because the Tiger 2, the Tiger 1, because it has 102 millimeters of frontal plating. So that was very, very interesting. But again, this might be a shell very, very good for initiating hull break on AAA vehicles, and I always recommend to use a few of those. But remember, you can't shoot through obstacles. The third shell type is the M431 HeatFS shell, and it is a 5.8 kilogram heavy warhead with an initial muzzle velocity of 1216 meters per second. So it's much easier to lead and to aim with this shell than with the other two previous shell types. It also has just over 700 grams of TNT equivalent, so it also initiates hull break on lightly armored vehicles, which kind of seems to make the hash shell kind of useless, I'd say, especially because you have 320 millimeters of penetration at any distance and very good penetration retention against angles. And this shell type you will also find on the Hanomag Henschel Jagdpanzer 4.5, the Japanese Type 61, and the American tanks, namely the the M56 Scorpion, the M47 Patton 2, and the M48A1 Patton 3. So this shell type has a really great punch, and this is kind of a question if this is not a bit too strong, because this is the heat shell that so many other nations' medium tanks rely on, that you just can get your hands on after a very, very frustrating and intense grind, and also at higher battle ratings. which actually makes those tanks finally competitive. So you kind of see where where Gaijin overcompensates the Germans in a little bit, because they have no light tanks apart from tier 1, and then you get this powerful premium with this shell. And you can see in summary, you have a lot of mobility, not a lot of armor, not a lot of survivability, but quite a nasty punch. Again, what this tank completely lacks is any kind of solid shot. So you can't shoot through any kind of object. You are very much at a high risk of not hitting a target that's behind a tree or a bush, or a wooden object like a carport, I'd say. So yeah, again, spaced armor reduces the effectiveness of the heat shell, and also the hash shell completely neglects it. Side shots are unreliable in comparison to other tanks. Certainly the Super Hellcat has here the advantage, because the damage effect of a Heat FS shell when you hit the wrong part is not very great. And you also can't shred the crew from the side like you can do with a simple APHE shell. In this respect, the killing power advantages certainly lies within the hands of the Super Hellcat. And very often I got killed because I just had to pump more than 1 or 2 shells into the enemy to bring him down. And also hitting the ammo rack is not always guaranteed to blow a tank apart, especially the T-29s, T-34s, and even the IS-6s are very well known for their ammunition not exploding, especially when you hit them in the lower plate from the front, and this ammunition getting just yellow, orange, or even black and just not blow up. And that finally brings us on Berlin on the conquest mode, where the capture zone is between the Reichstag and the Kroll-Opera. Yes, they are really named like that. And I go behind the Reichstag, my favorite position that I use in many fast tanks, where you can have easy side shots on the enemy. The one thing that you have to pay attention for is other light or medium tanks that have the same idea the other way around. So I have my first quick look here on this position, and I find my first customer here, a oblivious medium tank, heavy tank, sorry, a T-34, and I actually hit his warheads and ammo rack him. Good result right there. Repositioning there, and yeah, at this point I have put out one player from the enemy team. Now let's have a quick look on something that I call avalanche effect. If you take out a lot of people in quick succession, I have here a careful look around the corner, so I'm not looking at the center of the screen. This is something that I do very often, and I can observe a lot of tanks right there, and I try to shoot here between the steel barns of this wagon, and I delete another American heavy tank, the T-29, with another ammo rack, it seems, or crew knockout rather, and the hit cam showed a T-44-100. I'm waiting for his appearance, and I delete him also with a crew knockout with the heat shell going through his turret. And there is another American heavy tank and another one showing in the back, the Super Pershing. I disable the T-29's gun, and then this AAA comes directly into my direction. He doesn't see me. Hull break initiated with the heat shell. Again, we are above the 700 grams TNT equivalent, and now I go again for the T-29, removing him to 2 crew members. I have the reload advantage over his crew replacement, so the commander was still there, and I got my ace and a multi-strike ×4 just like that. And that put out a lot of enemy tanks from the middle section of the map. I see here another dust cloud by an enemy tank firing. I tried to aim here, but I just hit the ridgeline. So yeah, at this moment my position is actually compromised, but I stick around too long. How to play your light tanks? Well, the light tank 101 is pretty simple. Don't get spotted, don't get hit, don't get shot at in the first place. Take side shots on the enemy, concentrate On the more dangerous opponents, for example, this IS-6 here, you have a heat shell that really can deal with him. Don't play around with hash against heavy tanks. The 90mm hash is not good enough. From 105mm onwards, you then can to think about reliably using hash, except for King Tigers when you are in a British tank, for example. Now, relocating and just keep the enemy guessing is also part of the Light Tank 101. Also, always be sure that you have some solid cover if somebody has spotted you and wants to go after you. Communicate with your team. Give away the enemy's position. Talk to them, talk in chat to them so that they can help you. Maybe somebody is in a position to take a shot at the enemy, he just has to notice it. Don't use your machine guns too often. Don't give away your position by just blazing away at aircraft or enemy AAAs. Use your main gun. Use your killing power to the best advantage. Be very efficient and careful with your shots and try to one-shot the enemy. Maybe let an enemy pass if you can't kill him in general. That often guarantees you more success than to take every shot that you can take. The RU-251 in this respect has an outstanding killing power with the heat shell, but it's not a one-shot potential. This advantage definitely goes to the Super Hellcat. And in this respect, I have to say, the overwhelming majority of kills, with the exception of the IS-6, I also could have done with the Super Hellcat. And there goes my 8th kill, hull break on this M13. This is a really nice double strike here again. I wait for this other AAA, but I miss him. Bad shot right there on my behalf. And before I can reload, a King Tiger claims his well-deserved meal on this ZSU-37. At this moment, the match is basically over, and yeah, that was the match. And again, we have to wait up until the last enemy player goes into an aircraft and flies around. There he goes. And yeah, let's see what he can do with one plane against the entire enemy team. The fun fact is that the RU-251 does not really suffer from an up tier like the King Tiger does, because you have an outstanding mobility, and maneuverability armor is completely irrelevant regardless of your battle rating. Even at tier 1 the armor is not extremely convincing. And there you can see in the background there is a mouse. That means we are in a 7.7 battle rating matchup, but I really didn't have any problems because the overwhelming majority of opponents that I faced were 6.7 or 7.0 respectively. So yeah, you can see this tank can hold itself. The problem that we have is with the overall statistics. I made a lot of statistics. The overwhelming majority of matches were 6.7 when there were a lot of players on the servers worldwide. We are looking here about 75-80,000 players. Then you get a lot of 6.7s. When it drops under 60,000, you get a lot of 7.0 lineups. That's at least what I figured out with over 40 games played alone in realistic. So that's enough rambling. Let's take a quick look at the post-battle results. And for my 8 kills and 1 enemy kill assist, I got over 75,000 silver lines and 6,749 research points. I'm currently not researching anything, so there was no additional multiplier applied. And you can see a lot of the silver lines come from awards such as Survivor and Balancer. So that's it for the tank review on the RU-251. Before we end the video, I want you to make a few comments in the comment section about this tank. Have you played it yourself? What do you think about this tank being so low in battle rating? Or do you think the battle rating is okay? What do you think about the price tag for this premium tank? I'm very interested in your opinion. I like the tank, it can hold itself, but it's a little bit on the selfish side of playstyle, and I don't think it's the perfect addition to the tech tree to support the King Tigers in their struggle at 6.7. I have quite a low win ratio in this tank despite my best efforts and despite having all the tanks and planes spaded around it. The superiority of the enemy teams were in most cases just too big for me to make a difference. So that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we will see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.